Welcome to Have You Read It, the channel where we bring books to life, one summary at a time. Today we're diving deep into Arthur Brooks's From Strength to Strength, a transformative guide for finding success, happiness, and deep purpose in the second half of your life. This book isn't just a collection of feel-good advice, it's a research-backed strategic plan to reshape your future. Brooks starts with a compelling, almost unsettling premise. Your professional decline is coming, and it's likely arriving sooner than you think. He challenges the common belief that aging and its effects on professional performance are distant concerns. In fact, for most high-skill professions, this decline often begins between your late 30s and early 50s. He shares the story of Charles Darwin, a man who, despite his immense contributions to science, felt his career was a disappointment towards the end of his life. Even after publishing his magnum opus, On the Origin of Species, Darwin struggled with creative stagnation and unhappiness, feeling that his life had become wearisome despite having everything to make him happy. This wasn't an isolated case. The book references research by Benjamin Jones, a professor at Northwestern University's Kellogg School of Management, whose studies on inventors and Nobel laureates show that the likelihood of major discoveries peaks in one's late 30s and declines significantly thereafter. Similar patterns emerge in various knowledge fields. Writers see decline setting in between 40 and 55, financial professionals peak between 36 and 40, and doctors often see steep drop-offs in skill as the years pass. To illustrate this point, Brooks shares a personal story. As a child, his only goal was to become the world's greatest French horn player, practicing hours each day. However, in his early 20s, his skills began to decline inexplicably, leading him to eventually abandon his musical aspirations and redirect his life towards social science. This decline isn't just an unwelcome surprise, it's also a huge mystery for many. Progress isn't a straight line upward. So, what explains the downward portion? One theory suggests that intelligence decreases with age, but that is not quite accurate. A more compelling explanation involves structural changes in the brain, specifically the degrading effectiveness of the prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for working memory, executive function, and the ability to block out distractions. This degradation affects rapid analysis, creative innovation, and multitasking abilities. The book introduces the principle of psychoprofessional gravitation, which suggests that the agony of decline is directly related to prestige previously achieved and one's emotional attachment to that prestige. Those who attain excellence and are deeply invested in it can feel pretty irrelevant when they inevitably fall from those heights. Early achievements are not an insurance policy against later suffering. So, what can be done about this inevitable decline? Brooks presents three choices: deny the facts and rage against decline, give in to decline and experience aging as an unavoidable tragedy, or accept the need to build new strengths and skills. If you choose the third option, there's a bright future ahead. Aging isn't all bad news. In fact, there are specific ways in which we naturally get smarter and more skillful. The trick to improving as we age is to understand, develop, and practice these new strengths. The book highlights that older people tend to have richer vocabularies and are better at combining and utilizing complex ideas. They excel at interpreting the ideas that others have and at telling a story from data. To explain these phenomena, Brooks introduces the work of British psychologist Raymond Cattell, who in 1971 published Abilities, Their Structure, Growth, and Action. Cattell posited that there are two types of intelligence: fluid intelligence and crystallized intelligence. Fluid intelligence is the ability to reason, think flexibly, and solve novel problems. It is highest relatively early in adulthood and diminishes rapidly starting in one's 30s and 40s. Crystallized intelligence, on the other hand, is the ability to use a stock of knowledge learned in the past. It tends to increase with age through one's 40s, 50s, and 60s, and does not diminish until quite late in life, if at all. Brooks writes that the success curve we experience in our careers is, in effect, the fluid intelligence curve. Meanwhile, the crystallized intelligence curve increases through middle and late adulthood. The key is to transition from relying on fluid intelligence to leveraging crystallized intelligence. Careers that rely solely on fluid intelligence tend to peak and decline early. However, careers requiring crystallized intelligence, or those that can be repurposed to rely more on it, can see a much later peak and a prolonged period of productivity. The study of history is one career that requires huge stocks of knowledge and the wisdom to synthesize it. It is an almost pure crystallized intelligence field. Similarly, teaching requires verbal skill and a gift for explaining large amounts of accumulated information. The process of getting older shouldn't be about goofing off. Instead, it should be dedicated to service, making the most of our wisdom and our ability to counsel others. That means mentoring, advising, and teaching others in a way that does not amass worldly rewards of money, power, or prestige. The book shares an example of Johann Sebastian Bach, who experienced professional decline as a musical innovator. Instead of becoming frustrated, he reinvented himself as a teacher, working on The Art of Fugue, a collection of fugues and canons intended to teach compositional techniques. Bach transitioned from one curve to the other. This transition requires the courage and fortitude to make changes in our lives and careers, to become more of a teacher, whatever that means in one specific field. By making the jump, the reward is almost always enormous. To make this jump to the second curve, the book says it is crucial to understand and remove the three forces holding us back: our addiction to work and success, our attachment to worldly rewards, and our fear of decline. Brooks shares a poignant conversation with a successful woman on Wall Street who, despite her achievements, was deeply unhappy. She confessed that she might prefer to be special rather than happy, prioritizing external validation over personal well-being. This is the essence of success addiction. Like all addictions, success addiction dehumanizes. The financier saw herself not as a full person, but rather more like a high-performance machine. She had traded herself for a symbol of herself. Workaholism, the compulsion or uncontrollable need to work incessantly, is a common addiction among professionally successful people. Workaholics often work crushing hours, crowding out relationships and outside activities. Addicts feel misunderstood and under attack and engage in secretive behavior. The spouse feels neglected and hurt. Workaholism feeds fear and loneliness. Fear and loneliness feed workaholism. Workaholism keeps you chained to your job. But even more, it keeps you stuck in all your old work patterns because you fear doing anything that separates you from the day in, day out of your most important relationship. And that makes jumping to a new curve all but impossible. What workaholics truly crave isn't work, per se. It is success. They kill themselves working for money, power, and prestige because these are forms of approval, applause, and compliments, which stimulate the neurotransmitter dopamine. The success addict is never successful enough. The high only lasts a day or two, and then it's on to the next success hit. The goal can't be satisfied. The success addict is never successful enough. Humans reduce themselves to one or two enviable characteristics such as physical beauty, money, or power. This is called objectification. Celebrities often talk about how terrible it is to be objectified in this way. Marriages based on objectification inevitably fail miserably. It is easy to forget that we can do it to ourselves as well. The financier had objectified herself to be special, with a self-definition that revolved around work, achievement, worldly rewards, and pride. Self-objectification lowers self-worth and life satisfaction. It leads to body shame and low self-esteem, which degrade life satisfaction. Meanwhile, staying high in the success hierarchy is grinding work. Social comparison, fear of failure, and perfectionism are like Dante's prideful sea of ice, freezing you in place. According to St. Augustine, every other kind of sin has to do with the commission of evil deeds, whereas pride lurks even in good works in order to destroy them. Success is fundamentally positional, meaning it enhances our position in social hierarchies. Social scientists for decades have shown that positional goods do not bring happiness. If you want to be happy, you have to state your honest aspiration to be happy, to be willing to be a little less special in worldly terms, and thus to stop objectifying yourself. You must state your desire to lighten your load with pride's opposing virtue, humility. The book suggests a litany of humility to combat workaholism, pride, fear of failure, perfectionism, and social comparison. The next step in overcoming success addiction requires confronting and shedding the symbols of that specialness, the positional goods that signify your importance to the world. A visit to the National Palace Museum in Taiwan sets the stage for the next major theme: the Eastern view that art already exists, and our job is simply to reveal it by taking away the parts that are not the art, rather than creating something from nothing. This is also what we should do with our lives: strip things away to find our true selves, and thus to find our second curve. Instead of accumulating more to represent ourselves, strip things away to find our true selves. This idea stands in stark contrast to the bucket list mentality, which focuses on acquiring more experiences and possessions. The bucket list reinforces acquisitiveness, which derails the search for happiness by obscuring one's essential nature. Thomas Aquinas, the son of Count Landulf of Aquino, was expected to enter the church and was slated to succeed his uncle. But Thomas had no interest in this worldly glory. At the age of 19, he announced his intention to join the recently created Dominican order, a mendicant group of monks dedicated to poverty and itinerant preaching. And Aquino would not be an impoverished nobody. His family was having none of it, and Aquino would not be an impoverished nobody. At one point, they even kidnapped him from the Dominicans and imprisoned him in a castle, where he was held for a year. He attained true greatness only by foregoing the world's definition of greatness, by chipping away the world's rewards to find his essential self. Thomas argues that money, power, pleasure, and honor are substitutes for God, idols that objectify the idolater and never satisfy the craving for happiness. Those attachments must be chipped away to make it possible to jump onto the second curve. Similarly, Siddhartha Gautama, a prince, left his kingdom to learn how to face life's suffering as an ascetic. After 6 years of living a life of poverty, he realized that release from suffering comes not from renunciation of the things of the world, but from release from attachment to those things. A middle way shunned both ascetic extremism and sensuous indulgence, because both are attachments and thus lead to dissatisfaction. At the moment of this realization, Siddhartha became the Buddha. Satisfaction is continually getting what you want. In other words, we need ever greater success to avoid dissatisfaction, yet our abilities to stay even are declining. No, it's actually a triple whammy, because as we try to stay even, we wind up in patterns of addictive behavior such as workaholism, which puts strivers into unhealthy relationship patterns at the cost of deep connection to spouses, children, and friends. Social scientists have shown that the desire to get more than others does not bring happiness, and that social comparison lowers our happiness. Further, staying high in the success hierarchy is grinding work. Thus, to have 5 cars, 5 bathrooms, or even 5 shirts makes no sense in modern life, but we want them. We should use the wisdom of Siddhartha and Thomas to use this equation instead, which incorporates the wisdom of Siddhartha and Thomas and the best modern social science. Satisfaction equals what you have, what you want. If you're experiencing decline in fluid intelligence, and if you are my age, it doesn't mean you are washed up. It means it is time to jump off the fluid intelligence curve and onto the crystallized intelligence curve. Those who fight against time are trying to bend the old curve instead of getting onto the new one. But it is almost impossible to bend, which is why people are so frustrated, and usually unsuccessful. Managing your wants is key to increasing satisfaction. This can be achieved through the following ways: asking, "What's my why?" which will then make the what's irrelevant, creating a reverse bucket list, and focusing on the smaller things in life. One key aspect of successfully jumping to the second curve is to come to terms with your own death. As long as there is fear of death, a person will find that there is a resistance to change. Contemplating death can make life more meaningful. And although death is inevitable, it also seems impossible insofar as we cannot conceive of not existing, creating an unresolvable or unbearable cognitive dissonance. One way people deal with the crisis of non-existence is by trying to engineer a professional legacy. That is, if a body of work has value and can be seen, it can grant a sort of immortality. Another strategy is to live to work. When you think about it, however, dying isn't necessarily the inferior alternative, and the prospect of not having an alternative can be frightening. However, that doesn't mean one should go on too long. It is best to know when to walk away. To contemplate a eulogy, however, is the easy part. Now the harder part, staring right at your death and decline itself. The ancient Stoic philosopher Marcus Aurelius reminds us that our efforts at posterity always fail, and thus are not worth pursuing. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't do the right thing. We should. The key to remember that we have a moral duty to work toward, and act toward, and seek the good. This does not mean being despondent, but it means being authentic. The point isn't to depress anybody. It is to remind us that in denominating time in memorable, scarce events, we have a much better sense of its scarcity. Thus, we use it more wisely. This is the same idea as saying we should live each day as if it were our last. It helps us to make the decisions that truly expose our best selves. It is to accept the life that you want. However, the time to prepare for death isn't on our deathbed. What is needed now is to build relationships in our current lives. That way, we don't have to experience death alone. The problem is that many people do decline alone. On their way up, they have let their relationships wither. So on the way down, they don't have a human safety net. Relationships are key to jumping successfully on the second curve. We may look solitary, but we form a vast root system of families, friends, communities, nations, and indeed the entire world. That is why, to live our best lives, the first step is to prioritize relationships, and that starts with love. That's what researchers at Harvard have found. Good genes aren't key, but joy is. Happiness is love. Loneliness is not the same as being alone, of course, because one can be emotionally and socially connected to others while alone. Loneliness is the experience of emotional and social isolation. It has the weird property of being utterly ubiquitous, yet feeling completely unique. And even if they do continue to venerate your legacy, that it will be so great. As we prepare to live in the back half of our lives, what kind of person do you want to be? If you have spent most of your life to this point striving and achieving, it may be helpful to remember that there may not be as many people cheering you on as you think. As the years pass, they may want you to be cheerleading them more than they are interested in celebrating you. In other words, people may want you to focus less on accomplishments and more on relationships. When we hear about big changes in midlife, we often assume they are a crisis. This leads to much of life disappointment. All this fed the conventional belief that midlife transitions were negative, and maybe even a physical inevitability. However, no one is doomed to turn into John DeLorean because of some temporary insanity at midlife. This was especially true for women who have larger, denser, more supportive friend networks than men. It seems obvious, doesn't it? The person who can be at peace with these things has a life full of richness, whether they are praised for it or not. It is for this reason that people report lower loneliness and higher well-being as they connect with others and develop greater spiritual depth. It is an acceptance and connection that becomes more pronounced than external praise. The relationships that best mitigate loneliness, that the aspens closest to us that we need to cultivate, are romantic partnerships and close friendships. You can be single and happy if you have other close, fulfilling family links and friendships. But equally important, your marriage cannot be your only true friendship. A lot of pressure is taken off a marriage when these needs are met elsewhere, and it makes rough patches in a marriage easier to handle. There is a kind of a friendship ladder, according to Aristotle, from lowest to highest. At the bottom are friendships based on utility, deal friends. Higher up are friends based on pleasure. At the highest level is Aristotle's perfect friendship, which is based on willing each other's well-being and a shared love for something good and virtuous that is outside either of you. We can also have a problem with those we want to befriend. Most women, for instance, tend to have a great friendship base from their years of schooling and raising families, which gives them a better foundation for connection than men. Therefore, men especially should learn to cultivate intimate friendships. It is not hard. It just requires attention and care. In light of all this, it has become common for a life goal to become find your purpose. It's a good starting point, to be sure. It has become common to hear things like, if you find work that is interesting and meaningful, you will never work a day in your life. You can think about what is best for yourself and how those choices will affect the world around you. What you are looking for in these choices is to serve others to the best of your strengths. Make those strengths the most important part of who you are. If all this is sounding hard or unrealistic, there are now many structured resources to guide you. Just as a life coach might help an athlete to improve their performance, people can help you find direction and purpose in your life, so that you can get on the second curve and live more fully than ever before. You must, before anything else, identify your marshmallow. Then ask yourself, what am I pursuing in my work? Is my reward at my job the work itself? Is my joy coming from people? Now ask, what are you resisting? What does your future hold that is scary to you? Can you find the good in it and bless your life for it? The final step is to prepare yourself for what it is going to feel like to jump. The ancient Stoic philosopher Marcus Aurelius used to tell himself that the universe is transformation, life is opinion. All life is a journey, not a destination. That's why what we do is called career, and not career has been. There is something exciting about seeing our skills decline with age because we don't have so much time left to be bored. Every day we have a good reason to get up and look for something to do. Even if it takes a lot of money to get something done, say making a movie, you can at least ask whether that requires something like spiritual capital from your life, even if there is a spiritual angle on it. In my journey as a social scientist, I came across one ancient Indian teaching about the 4 stages of life that particularly stood out. It's an important concept, because it turns out most people have a particular difficulty with it, the stage of life that involves scaling back. There is the stage where people pull back from the world to give way to the next generation. With all this in mind, it might be time for you to look out over the precipice and ask what you have to do. Don't think, dude, just jump. The way to do that is to get out of the rut and put your best foot forward. Get past the question of what you do, but what you intend to do with the life you still have. There are people who have lived for many years with such change, with the knowledge of the great shift they have made. It is they we want to learn from as we prepare ourselves for what might well be our last best acts. In sum, fellow striver, there is a formula to keep in mind that helps you remember these lessons and make a real change in the way you see your life. Use things, love people, worship the divine. By keeping these things in order, it is very likely you will find that you too can live happily ever after. To really solidify these lessons from strength to strength, let's break it down into a few easy-to-remember heuristics. Embrace the second curve. Don't fight decline. Find new avenues for growth by leveraging crystallized intelligence. Dethrone your idols. Break free from the chains of money, power, pleasure, and prestige to discover true fulfillment. Cultivate your aspen grove. Invest deeply in relationships and build a strong support system. Ponder your end. Contemplate your mortality to gain clarity and purpose in the present. Find strength in weakness. Embrace vulnerability and use your struggles to connect with others. Cast into the falling tide. Don't fear change. Seize the opportunities that arise during life's transitions. Live intentionally. Make conscious choices aligned with your values and purpose. Thanks for watching. Make sure to give this video a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button so you never miss our next book dive.